In today's video, I want to teach you guys how to identify every 911 built between 1964 and 1973. These are the long hood 911s or the F-body cars. And we're going to use the exterior features to try and narrow down what we're looking at. So Porsche was making a lot of changes year over year to the car, and we can use that to allow us to narrow down quickly on what car we're looking at exactly. So this is not always going to work. People make a lot of changes to their cars. There's some features that people like to pull from other years and put on their cars. So this is not always going to work, but if the cars were stock, that's kind of how we're going to look at it. So we're going to start off with a quick reference, which is basically the fastest way I've found to identify the year. And then afterwards, we'll jump into each year and talk about differences between trim levels. And then at the end, we'll do basically a test where we throw up cars and we try and figure out which year and which model maybe it is. So let's get into it. So this is meant to be a quick reference guide. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time detailing everything that's possibly different about all the different model years at this point. We're just going to run through them real fast and show you what's the quickest way. So on a 64, what you're looking for is this connected Porsche script on the rear deck lid. And the second thing you're going to look for is the fact that there is no 911 badge anywhere on the back of this. Those two in combination will tell you whether this is a 64 or not. So for 1965 and 1966, we're going to group these two together because they're pretty much indistinguishable. So you're going to look for the same rear Porsche script badge that is connected. And you're also going to look for the 911 badge, which is kind of angled off on the bottom right of the deck lid. Now, in 66, they started offering an option to add rubber to your bumperettes. So if you see those two combination, the Porsche and the angled 911, and it also has the rubber, then it's definitely a 66 and not a 65. For 1967, what you're going to look for is the Porsche script, which is gold but not connected on the rear deck lid. And then you're also going to look for this door handle, which has a thumb press button to open the door. Those two things will only be on 67s. For 68s, what you're going to look for is whether this is a short wheelbase car or not. Now, 68 was the last year of the short wheelbase car, which is basically the length between the wheels was changed to help with the pendulum effect with all the weight in the back with the engine. So what you're going to look for is whether this is a short wheelbase car or not first. And you can tell that pretty quickly. This has a longer hood grill, and then it also has the 2-bolt turn signal up front, which is a short wheelbase feature. And then the other thing you're going to look for is this other door handle, which kind of has, it's a bit wider, I'd say, than a 67. And those two in combination will only be on 68s. For 1969s, what you're going to look for is this 3-bolt turn signal. Same thing with the brake lights. They'll have 3 bolts as well instead of 2. This identifies a long wheelbase car, which is a 69 through 73. And then you're also going to look for the same door handle that was on that 68 we just looked at. Those two in combination will only be 69s. Now again, here on the 70 and 71, we're going to group them together because they're pretty much indistinguishable, at least from the exterior. And what you're going to be looking for here is these round circular mirrors. Well, there's only going to be one mirror, but the circular mirror here on the driver's door and the later style door handle. So this will look different than a 68, 69, and it won't have the thumb press button as the earlier 911s before 1968 had. So those two in combination will identify a 70 and a 71. Now 72 might be the easiest year to pick up because there's one defining feature that only was on a 72, and you can pick up on it really quickly, and that's that rear oil door right here. In previous cars, the oil fill was back here under the rear deck lid, and for 72, they went to this behind the right side door. For 1973, what you're going to find is black trim around the turn signals and taillights. This was standard on 73s, and it's the only year that would be standard on. So that's my quick reference guide to figuring out what year a long hood is, and you should be able to school someone at your next car event, but that's really just the tip of the iceberg. Next, we're going to jump into individual years and the trim levels that were offered and some of the visual indicators for which trim level you're looking at. And I just want to say that this is in no way a comprehensive list of exactly what these trim levels are. Cars could have been optioned in many different ways. So for 1964, 65, 66, there's only one trim level. It's just the 911. So if you can identify the year, then you know it's a 1965 911, for example. You might be able to pick up what market the car was sold in, but we'll talk about that in a minute here with the 68s. For 67, we have the introduction of the 911S. You can distinguish an S from a 911 base model by the thicker deco trim. This metal and rubber trim that runs around the outside of the car is called deco trim. It's going to be a common thing we talk about for a lot of the model, well, every model year, and it's going to be a big tool for picking up trim levels. So again, the S67 thicker rubber trim versus this thinner rubber. You can see the piece of rubber running through the center is much thinner on a base. The second thing is these all silver Fuchs. This is the introduction of the Fuchs in the 911, and the base models will have these steel wheels. For 68, we want to jump into distinguishing what market the car was sold in first, because this is the only year that Porsche sold different models in the US versus the rest of the world. So you can pick that up with the color of the turn signals. You can see here the US ones are all orange versus the Euro ones, which have a white section in the center, and the Italian ones, which are kind of the opposite of the Euro. Now the Euro and the Italian, we're going to group those cars together here in a second because their trims are the same. The US is the only one that had a different grouping of 911s. So in the US, the 911s were sold in the L trim level or in just the base level. An L looks a lot like an S. You're going to find thicker deco trim and Fuchs, but you can tell this is a US car, and which makes it an L because of the all orange turn signals and these side reflectors. So for the base, you can find thinner deco trim, again, orange side reflectors, base model 68 US 911. So for Europe, we have the L and the S, which I've grouped together because they're pretty much indistinguishable. You're going to find the thicker deco trim and these Fuchs, which now have a black backdrop. For the base models, you can see that there's thinner deco trim and steel wheels. Now, my research was a little bit interesting here. The 911 base model and 911T, this is the introduction of the T, which kind of slotted in at the lower end of the trim levels. It's hard to figure out whether they really sold just a 911 base by itself in Europe or whether it was just completely replaced by the 911T. There are different sources that say different things here, so we grouped them together. The S and the L are together here, and they have a different horsepower rating on their engines. And the T kind of slotted in between the 912 and the 911s. For 69, 70, and 71, we're going to group them together. We can obviously distinguish 69s from 70s and 71s, but as far as the trim levels, they're going to be very common in what their characteristics are. So the T's will have the thin deco trim again, and the E and the S will have the thicker deco trim. 72 is an interesting year because some of my research says that you can distinguish each of the trim levels from one another. The T would have had thinner deco trim and just this normal looking bumper. It was actually really hard for me to find a 72 with thin deco trim. So it seems like a lot of the cars were optioned with the thicker, wider deco trim, regardless of whether they were a T. And then the E would have the base bumper again and the thicker deco trim. And then the S is alone in having the thicker deco trim and this new split bumper in the front. For 1973 on the T, you're going to find thinner deco trim. It is pretty hard to find any car at this point with the thinner deco trim. Most cars from 73 have the thicker deco trim. And you're also going to see the base bumper. The E, though, some of the research says that you would find thinner deco trim and this split chin bumper that we saw in 72 on the S. But I can't find any pictures of that, so I've grouped the E and the S together here. So you're going to find on the 73s the thicker deco trim and the split chin for the E and the S most of the time. All right, so now we're going to jump into testing our knowledge a little bit, and I'm just going to structure this by giving you guys a few seconds. Maybe you can pause the video to try and identify it for yourself, and then I will go through analyzing exactly what I'm seeing. So go ahead and take a few seconds, maybe pause the video. Good luck. All right, so let's just start off by trying to narrow down whether this is a long wheelbase car or a short wheelbase car. I can see 3 bolts right off the bat on this turn signal, which means this is a 69 through 73. Now, we don't see the oil door here, so it's not a 72. It does not have black trim on the turn signal, so it's not a 73. So now we've narrowed it down to 69, 70, or 71. And this is a later door handle. It's not the 68 or 69, so this is not a 69. So this is going to be a 71 or 70. And then we can look at deco trim here is thicker, so most likely it'll be an E or an S. So here's our second car. We're going to take a few seconds, maybe pause the video again. So I'm going to narrow down to a short wheelbase car just off the 2-bolt turn signal. Then we see an early door handle, which is characteristic of a 64 through 67. So this is not a 68. And then we see rubber on the bumperettes, which was introduced in 66. So this is either 66 or 67. And then we see Fuchs, which was a 67. Specifically, it was on the S. And we can see this is an all orange turn signal. So this is a US 67 911S. So here's our third and final car. So hopefully you've come up with an answer by now, but we can see a 3-bolt brake light, which is a long wheelbase car. So this is a 69 through 73. And then we can see a 68 or 69 door handle. So this must be a 69. And then we can see thin deco trim. So we're going to take a guess that this is a 911T. Oh, now we can see it. Didn't realize I put that there, but we're going to guess 1969 911T. So that's all I've got for you guys today. Go ahead and let me know if you have any other techniques or you've learned anything. You know, how'd you do on the little 3-car test at the end? And hopefully you can go out to your next car event and school someone on what type of long hood 911 you're looking at.